Hello and welcome to pain. Probably the biggest pain I've ever had to go through in any challenge run so far. But I would endure any pain for the working class. Cue up the Soviet music. Hi, I'm Amon, and I tried beating the Warcraft 3 Undead campaign with only Acolytes. So let's establish the rules. The obvious one is I can only build Acolytes. I often start the level with other units, but I have to kill them off as soon as I start the level. And I can also build any building I want, but I will refrain myself from building towers on the first couple of missions. And of course, I have to play on the hardest difficulty. Those were the same rules I had in my Peasants Only run in the Human campaign. But little did I know, this campaign was going to be so much worse than that one. Cause turns out, Acolytes suck. But before starting our Acolytes journey, there is a different kind of worker we will be using in no-build missions. Consider it an intro into the pain that is to come.
You are nothing but unorganized, grabastic pieces of amphibian shit!
So, on the first mission, you actually don't get any Acolytes at all. The objective of the mission is to collect them. And since I don't have access to Acolytes, the only alternative worker I have here is the Ghoul, who is a kind of sort of a worker. He can collect wood and stuff, but yeah. So I'll try to beat the level with Ghouls only. Only for this mission though, after that it's Acolytes only. And after almost losing my only 2 Ghouls from the first 2 swordsmen that I came across, I knew there was a really tough battle ahead of us. As I said, the objective of the mission is to collect Acolytes, or other Acolytes in disguise. Unfortunately, the Acolytes aren't gonna reveal themselves to just poor old Ghouls, they need Arthas next to them to reveal themselves. So I had to slightly adjust the rules for this first mission. I will only use Arthas to collect the Acolytes. And I will only allow myself to use Arthas if he isn't gonna interfere with anything on the map. Which means I will only use him if he doesn't aggro anyone to attack him, or if he doesn't scare off any villagers that are next to the Acolytes in disguise. I think those rules are quite fair. So throughout most of the level, I used my Ghouls to clear out the peasants that are located next to the Acolytes, and then I brought Arthas in to collect the Acolyte. All the while making sure he doesn't get spotted. Unfortunately, some of the villagers might escape my Ghouls, and they will call guards for help. But thankfully those guards will just be in the area for a couple of seconds and then they will go back to their posts. I guess playing cards is more important than saving villagers. In the middle of the map there is a graveyard, and the graveyard gives me 2 Ghouls and 3 skeletons. I mean, 2 Ghouls. The final part of the level is a bit finicky, however the enemy aggro range isn't really that high, so I was able to smuggle Arthas in with most of these Acolytes hidden up there. By the way, there is an Acolyte surrounded by a bunch of bandits in the upper right corner. However, there are 25 Acolytes on this map and you need 24 to win. So I will just collect every other Acolyte because this one is really hard to save with 4 Ghouls. And in the end there were 4 Acolytes surrounded by a bunch of swordsmen and a captain. But I used my tried and true bait and switch tactic, and I used my Ghouls to bait the guards to follow them, while I used Arthas to save those 4 Acolytes. Okay, and now it's time for a mission where I actually get to play with Acolytes.
There's a slap for you! Slap, slap, slap!
Okay, finally, we have a macro mission. And we get to build Acolytes. Wait, where are my Acolytes?
Oh no.
The first portion of this mission is a no-build segment, which gives us 5 Ghouls. Which means the same rules from the last level apply here as well. I can only use Ghouls to advance. Now, the first section of this mission is actually used to showcase the meat wagon. You know, the siege unit. And that means there's gonna be a lot of towers in my way, which I'm gonna have to kill with 5 Ghouls. Okay. Well, first I tried the normal approach, thinking that my 5 Ghouls are gonna be enough to crush these 2 towers in the beginning. I was wrong. I was so wrong. So I had to employ some out-of-the-box thinking. You see, units have target priorities in Warcraft 3. And turns out, if one of your units is being attacked, and you tell that unit to attack another unit, that unit will lose target priority, because the AI will think they're on their side, because, you know, they're attacking one of your units. However, you can abuse this to get your wounded ghouls to attack Arthas, who is somewhere far, far away, and get them out of danger. Which is exactly what I did. So I brought the first tower to very, very low health, and I brought all my ghouls back to safety. Then I went back in and I killed those towers. Okay, the first hurdle is done for. The second hurdle are a couple of footmen standing in my way. However, I can bait those footmen one by one to start attacking me, and then I can take them out. The next portion holds a very, very dangerous cannon tower, who I will not be able to kill on this level. However, there is a trigger that if I move one of my units into the middle of these two towers, all enemy units will be drawn to attack me. However, if I bring my units far away enough, only the paladin that I need to kill will be left alive. After that, I baited the remaining couple of defenders and I took them out. Then I took out one of the arrow towers by enlisting the help of the cannon tower, because it deals area of effect siege damage. And then I killed a couple of houses to the north, so Arthas can easily move to the objective without disturbing anyone. Okay, and now finally, after 500 years of waiting, we finally get to play with Acolytes. Now, there is only one gold mine on this level, so my income is gonna be pretty slow, but steady. And also, fun fact, if I don't build any of my production structures, the enemy will never attack me, so I just have to bust through their bases. So I made a couple of groups of acolytes, went into the first base, and I basically got slaughtered. These acolytes take so long to kill stuff that even the militia that spawned in the beginning of this section actually timed out and became regular workers again. That's how long they took to kill stuff. But the progress was steady, and whenever an acolyte was on low health, I gave it my best to send it to the base to regen health. I'm just too greedy to watch my 75 gold go to waste. And after successfully slapping away at the first paladin and the enemy production building, it was time for the second part. Now, there were a couple of knights defending the second paladin, and these do a lot of damage. However, they don't get rebuilt, so after they were killed, it was time for the paladin to die. Again, everything was so slow, and the paladin had huge armor, so it took me 50 years to take him out, and he even has an armor aura, so I couldn't really focus anyone other than him. But after I took him down, I had free reign to focus down the enemy soldiers and the enemy production structure. In the end, there's just one paladin remaining, Mr. Uther himself. And Mr. Uther surprisingly lacks any defenders. He was basically alone, so I just baited him, surrounded him with a bunch of acolytes, and they started slapping him to death. He used his shield a couple of times, which made him invulnerable, but he just couldn't outdamage the flood of workers that were going after him. And that was it. 3 paladins successfully slapped to death.
Please state the nature of your medical emergency.
Where do I even start here? Okay, from the beginning. The mission starts us off with a base being attacked by my units. I quickly selected all my non-worker units and I brought them back while my workers finished the job. Then I made a gold mine and a couple of citadels, and it was time to make a couple of control groups worth of acolytes. That's like 3 or 4 dozen of them. However, the problem with this level is that there are trees all around you, so I had to use one ghoul to cut down the trees leading to the right. And as soon as I did that, a hot elven chick appears and I slapped her silly to death. Thankfully, this will not be the last time we've seen her. Now, the right side offers a little outpost that isn't that well defended. So I took it down and now I have 2 gold mines worth of income. So far, so good. Then I made even more acolytes and I started going to the next enemy outpost. And this is where I came across the biggest blocker of my entire run. May I introduce to you the priest. The problem with the priest is that his heal heals so much, and you're supposed to use a unit that does high damage and who can quickly take him out. I do not own such units in this run. So for most of the levels, whenever I saw a priest, I used a bunch of acolytes to surround him and hope to God that he isn't gonna start healing himself, because he can even do that. If he is selfless enough to heal others, I might be able to kill him after quite a few seconds, but I will be able to kill him. However, all the while this is happening, the green base is sending their attack waves. In the beginning they're not that strong. A couple of archers here, a couple of swordsmen there, and Sylvanas joins them occasionally. However, after enough time has passed, they start sending in priests. And once those attack waves show up, I will not have enough time to take out a single attack wave before the next one comes. Which effectively means I will lose this level after about 20 minutes of playtime. It's that plain and simple. However, I did do my best. I destroyed the second village, and again I had 2 gold mines of income after the gold mine in my first base got depleted. However, now it's time to destroy the third outpost. This one doesn't have any priests in it, however, it does have sorceresses. A lot of sorceresses. And those sorceresses love using slow on me. And the problem isn't the slow, and the problem aren't even the sorceresses. The problem is that I'm taking so much time destroying this village that a green attack wave comes and then they join up with the defenders and I'm screwed. So now it was time to go back to the drawing board. The third base is the problematic one, so I thought to myself, why don't I destroy it first? But they will still join up with a green attack wave, so I had to use some out-of-the-box exploits to beat this one. You see, this mission has 2 phases. Phase 1 is when you destroy the enemy base, and then you get to the trees, which triggers a cutscene, and then Sylvanas appears, and the enemy will start sending attack waves after you. However, the game never tells you when I have to finish Phase 1. So what if I decide to finish Phase 1 when I finish mining all the gold in my gold mine?
2 hours later.
The first gold mine has about 13,000 gold. And I managed to mine all of it out. And all of it before I started the second phase. And now with a bunch of money in my pocket, I made 100 workers using my 10 necropolises. And now it's time for phase 2. My ghoul took out a couple of trees. I used my acolytes to make Sylvanas' day really bad. And I attacked the south base. I had so much stuff and so many units, they never stood a chance. A green attack wave did come at some point, which made things a bit slower, but I took it out as well. So now I have a new gold source. The gold mine to the right of my base didn't have any defenders, so I took it again. So now I have 2 gold production. And to make respawning my units much faster, I deconstructed my 10 necropolises from my base, and I made 10 necropolises right next to the enemy main base. Throughout the level, I usually make sure I don't go above 50 supply. Gold is a bit of a problem here, and I do like having a lot of it, so yeah, 50 supply. The only time when I go above it is when I'm gonna attack the base. And when I'm gonna attack the base, well, it's gonna be after the enemy attack wave. So when I see an attack wave, I make a bunch of workers, and I attack the enemy main base. And I did that, I thought I did really well. However, next time the enemy sent an attack wave with 5 priests. I'll repeat, 5 priests. I spent 10 minutes trying to get rid of that one single attack wave. I could not do it, even after 10 minutes. They were just healing each other like there is no tomorrow. I couldn't do anything. So I went back to the drawing board one last time. And this is where I discovered that if you destroy the enemy priest building, the Arcane Sanctuary, well, the enemy AI will not rebuild it. They will rebuild the Elven Barracks and the Altar of Kings that the enemy has, but they will not rebuild this building, for whatever reason. So I took a bunch of acolytes, I sniped the building as fast as I possibly could, and somehow, someway, I took it down. By the way, the only good thing about playing acolytes only is that you have a bunch of units which are able to surround the building. So the enemy worker who comes to repair it isn't able to do any repairs. So yeah, this is the only good thing about this challenge. That's it. I took down the building and it was smooth sailing after that. I messed up a bunch of acolytes, I attacked the enemy main base, I fought for like straight up 10 minutes to destroy everything that they have. I took another 10 minutes destroying the enemy castle because that building is literally unkillable and they love repairing it, so I had to literally surround this huge massive building with acolytes, and after I managed to do that, I won. I played this mission for 3 hours. and it's only mission 3. My god.
I'll build anywhere. Sorry, I can't build there.
And if you thought the last mission was the only one that I played for 3 hours, oh, how wrong you were. This mission starts us off with a bunch of units, a couple of acolytes, and a gold mine being defended by a bunch of flyers. In fact, the enemy sends flyers on this level all the time. And since my acolytes can't slap up, I'm gonna start allowing myself to build towers. And since towers cost wood, I'm also gonna allow ghouls to start gathering lumber. But first I had to get rid of the flyers. I made a quick town hall a bit further away so I can put blight on it. Then I made a graveyard and a ziggurat, and I upgraded the ziggurat. And I thought I would easily destroy the flyers with the ziggurat, which I did. However, what I didn't know is that the enemy attacks you almost instantly on this level. And my money was actually very limited. I had just enough to make a haunted gold mine, however, I can't beat the enemy attack wave without repairing the tower. However, I once more used my unsummon mechanic to get 50% of the resources I spent on the graveyard and town hall. So I had just barely enough money to beat this wave. But soon I managed to stabilize, build a bunch of towers and 2 choke points around my base, and it was time for some offense. Honestly, I thought now that I can build towers, my life would be so much easier. I thought I would just bait people who are defending the base to attack me, and then the towers would finish them off. However, there are a couple of problems with that. First of all, before I can do anything, I have to build an acropolis so I can make creep. And an acropolis takes forever to make. But okay, I just need to find a quiet corner and I can do that. Step 2 is make a bunch of towers. Also easy enough, right? However, those towers do need some time to build up. And thirdly, I have to upgrade the towers, which also takes some time. So there was no way I could build towers in the middle of combat like I did in the Peasants Only campaign. Or so I thought. But we'll get there later. My first target was the base on the right. That one is the easiest one. So I made a bunch of towers, I baited the enemies towards me, the towers killed everyone, and I kind of ran out of money, and my units just couldn't get past all the enemy units that are being rebuilt. Seriously, this is insane. I really thought my life would be so much easier now. But okay, yet again, back to the drawing board. Which, in most cases for me, means a reset. However, one good thing came out of this attempt. You see, there is a gold mine in the middle of the map, which is defended by a bunch of units. However, turns out that those units aren't placed that closely to the gold mine as one might think. Which means you can sneak a couple of workers from behind with an airship and make a sneaky gold mine that won't be disturbed.
They came from behind!
On my next attempt, I decided to immediately capture that gold mine in the middle, so now I'm gonna be floating in cash. And what I did with that cash is get to the middle island and make a bunch of towers next to a couple of gateways. And those gateways lead straight into enemy bases. And I also made like 10 town halls, so I'm gonna easily reinforce all my units. So first I went after the right base. But this time I told one unit to get into the portal, attack a unit on the other side and get back, which will draw all the defenders from the other side towards the middle. And there they're gonna be greeted by a bunch of towers. And after doing that a couple of times, I managed to kill a bunch of their defenders. So I went in with a bunch of acolytes and sniped their production buildings. This player doesn't have any workers and they only have 2 production buildings, so this was easy. And this gave me another gold mine. And now I'm back at 2 gold mine production since the first one got dried out. And on that side I also destroyed the little box that contains an item that Arthas needs to pick up. This level can't be beaten without him, so the same rules as the previous 2 levels apply. Arthas isn't allowed to be detected or attacked. He can only pick up the items and that's it. Okay, and one might think this worked for the left side, let's do the same thing for the base on the north. Well, there's a slight problem about that. You can bait a couple of guys to follow you back, that's no problem. However, these guys, they produce stuff all the time. And not only that, most of the things they produce are air units, so I won't be able to touch them. And to make things even better, they repair and reproduce buildings, so I can't snipe them either. And a lot of the times when you try to bait them, they refuse to cooperate. These guys are pretty smart. So I guess that's it. There's nothing I can do here. My tools are very limited. But I did try to make one final play of desperation at some point. And when I say desperation, I really meant it. I was so desperate at this point. And this was like 2 hours into the level, so I was both tired and desperate. So, I made a bunch of acolytes, I sent them through the portal, and I made an acropolis right next to the portal. And the necropolis takes 5 hours to build. However, at this point of the game, money wasn't really an issue. I was floating in cash, for the time being. But yes. So, I did what any sane player would do. I sent hundreds and hundreds of acolytes into the meat grinder, just so they can buy enough time for the necropolis to finish. And at some point I managed to do it. And that left a bunch of blight next to it. So it was time for part 2. Fun fact, undead towers take 4 times as much space as human and orc towers do. So it's really finicky to find spaces to place them. But there were a couple of places next to the sea, which surprisingly the enemy doesn't really notice. So I placed 3 Ziggurats right there. And did you know, blight can spread over water. So there were a couple of spaces on the right side of the bank as well. And the entrepreneur that I am, I brought a bunch of acolytes to the right side, I destroyed a couple of defenders and towers, and I placed my towers there for support. However, this brings us to another discovery that I made. Those towers that I killed belong to the green player, so the one with a huge base on the left. And for whatever reason, when I attack these towers, the green player will think those towers are in his main base and they will send everything they have to defend them. So the middle of the map got flooded with enemies, but thankfully I had a bunch of towers there, so I managed to defend myself. And I made 3 more Ziggurats on the bank. And now I had 6 Ziggurats that were ready to attack the enemy. And turns out they did surprisingly well. They were targeted all the time, but I had a bunch of cash, so I made a bunch of acolytes to out-repair them. And soon I managed to place a couple more Ziggurats further into the enemy base. And since the enemy castle is conveniently located right next to the entrance, I managed to snipe all their workers and their castle with the towers. And a couple of acolytes helping. And then the rest of the base easily fell. And now I have another gold mine, which again brings me to 2 gold mines, since one of my previous ones ran out. I also destroyed the artifact box, and it was time to attack the last base. So again I made a bunch of towers next to the portal, I baited people from the other side to attack me, and this player loves doing that. It was really easy to do that. They love following me into the portal. This one isn't as smart as the previous one. And to further help my cause, I used one of the workers that I had on the island, and I started attacking the green anti-air tower. And you know what that means. They started sending everything they have. But turns out that's not the only thing that happened. At one point, there was a Sylvanas attack wave to the right of my main base. And I have never seen this happen. She totally became unresponsive. I was literally able to attack her and her friends with a ghoul. And she did not care. She didn't respond at all. What the hell, Reforged? What the hell? But okay, one hero less to deal with, I suppose. And yeah, the confusion doesn't end there. The enemy main base has no workers inside it. And although they have a perfectly working castle right in front of them, they didn't want to use it. I have no idea what happened. Did they place all the workers inside a zeppelin in order to get to the island and repair? I guess we'll never know. But yeah, I managed to bait the defenders from the island. Then I made an acropolis, which was surprisingly easy. Then I sold it, and I made a bunch of towers on its place. And then I killed their defenders with it. I also sniped the enemy buildings with workers, cause they are not gonna repair or rebuild anything, cause the workers are MIA. And that was it. I used Arthas to collect the remaining 2 keys, and I placed him on the final objective, which I cleared beforehand with my towers. I would like to say that weirder things had happened in my challenge runs, but None come to mind right now.
It's ruined. It's all ruined, just like my graduate thesis project.
Okay, next up is the mission where you have to enter Silvermoon, also known as the Runner mission, which is ironic enough because you're not gonna be seeing any runners here whatsoever. If you've seen my no production video, you'll know that you can trivialize this level by moving very quickly with all your units south of the base. For whatever reason, Sylvanas will not be able to attack you then, and she will not be able to start the runner's quest, and the enemy base won't be able to produce anything. So yeah, that's exactly what I did. I have to get rid of my units, but no one ever said where I have to get rid of them. So I brought all my units south and I killed them all. And Sylvanas was nowhere to be seen. The enemy does send a couple of attack waves, but that's like one hero with a couple of archers. So yeah, that's also gonna be pretty easy. They don't send real attack waves cause, again, something with the triggers got busted.
Oh no! Anyway.
I made a necropolis right next to their base, then I sold it and I made a bunch of towers. And I was ready to assault the base. I made a bunch of acolytes, I destroyed one of the towers, and then I made a couple of forward towers, and I started poking their production structures. And soon after that, the base stopped producing anything. Heroes, units, workers, they didn't do anything anymore. They just gave up. So yeah, the base fell, and it was time for phase 2. If you've asked yourself where Sylvanas is, the answer is in the middle of the map. And for whatever reason, she spawns when you start building a necropolis next to the door in the middle. So also pretty random. But yeah, her escort isn't that strong, and I took a group of acolytes and I crushed her. Slapped her to death. Then I made a bunch of towers next to the entrance and I went in. And soon after, I went out, baiting enemies one by one into the towers. Again, I have to make sure I lose as few units as possible, because my money is gonna be dreadful after a couple of rounds of acolyte production. The initial segment was easy, but then I arrived at the left side, and this one was covered by a very strong mage with a couple of strong units next to him. I also tried baiting them one by one, until the mage couldn't see anything on the right side. And then I smuggled a couple of workers further down the alley. Alongside the workers, there was a ghoul. One single ghoul. The problem with the triggers on this mission extend to the big city as well, but we'll get to that later. First, I used the ghoul to destroy a couple of trees. You see, the problem with the city is that I have very little space to build buildings. Or rather, very few space to build a necropolis before I can build the buildings that I want. This is the only place in this entire city where I can build a necropolis that isn't in the enemy main base. So I have to use it. There's a huge moss golem defending this portion, but he apparently doesn't care that I'm building a building behind him, so whatever. When I made the necropolis, I sold it again, and I had enough creep to build a couple of towers. And those towers extended their creep further to the right. And then I made a couple more towers, and I extended my creep further to the right. And this is where I made a bunch of towers. Those are gonna be used to destroy the enemy base defenders. There's the mage with a hefty escort in my way, and it's easier to kill them with a bunch of towers than with a bunch of acolytes. Next up is the enemy main base itself. And that base was surprisingly easy, cause again, the triggers in this mission are broken. So the enemy doesn't produce anything. As I said, I can take my sweet time with this mission, and I certainly did. This is the 2-hour mark of this mission. I took out a couple of buildings, then I made a couple of towers, and I baited a few flying defenders into them. Then I took out the base, but there was no gold mine in it. The money that I have now is all the money that I'm going to get. At one point, I was so desperate for cash that I sold all the initial unnecessary buildings in my base. The altar, the slaughterhouse, a bunch of towers, the towers at the entrance to the city, they were all gone. And then I proceeded past a great door. And behind the door was one single footman. So I killed him. And nothing happens. I don't think this has anything to do with broken triggers, and more like with triggers where the developers didn't expect me to go in rolling with acolytes only into this chamber. The next portion of the level triggers only when I bring a combat unit into this chamber. Queue up Timmy the Ghoul. After Timmy entered the chamber, I brought him back, and a huge force of enemies appears. And those totally obliterated me. So on my next attempt, I made a bunch of towers in the enemy former main base, and I baited the new enemies one by one until they died. There was this one swordsman hero who refused to follow me, so I had to use a bunch of acolytes to take him down. But before I managed to kill him, he disappeared, alongside with the whole army. They all went north. On the plus side, a few corridors opened now, and in order to get north, I had to bring Timmy the Ghoul to the north section. This triggers a cutscene where Arthas makes a bridge, and I'm able to cross it with my acolytes. Then on the left bank of this shore, I managed to find a little real estate where I was able to make an acropolis. And you know the drill. Then I sold it, and I made a bunch of towers. Money-wise, I was on my last legs. In the end, I baited a few heroes to the towers, and after a very gruesome fight, I managed to take them down. And as tough as this mission seemed, it was nothing compared to the horrors that I'm about to experience. God help us all.
What did it cost?
Everything.
Okay, here we go. I apologize if I sound tired, that's because I am. And the reason why I'm tired is because I've recorded this just after playing this level. For this video, I decided to do something different. I don't have a script where I read stuff, but everything I say is recorded immediately after the level, to sound a bit more authentic. Anyways, back to why I'm tired. I'm tired because I have started playing this level 8 hours ago. It took me 8 hours to beat this one. But let's start at the beginning. You play against 5 orc bases in this level, and you are located in the middle, so I placed a bunch of towers in the heart of my base around the citadel. Each base has its own unique twist, which I'm gonna talk about later. First, I went to the blue base to the left side. Their unique twist is that they have no unique twists. They are just a straight up orc base. And they don't really have that much stuff, so you know the drill. I built an acropolis, then I sold it, and then I placed towers on the creep. Then I baited a few defenders out, and I killed a couple of towers with my acolytes. However, there is a little problem. One that prevents me from doing proxy Ziggurats again. And it is called the Demolisher. And it is the orc siege unit. And this guy does the most damage out of all siege units in the game, and to top it all off, he also has the biggest range of all siege units in the game. Just a little spoiler, this guy is gonna make my life a living hell on this level. The first one though wasn't that difficult. I surrounded him with acolytes and I took him down. The enemy only produces units out of the barracks, so once I took it down with my acolytes, I thought this was gonna be it. However, there is also a little reoccurring problem throughout this mission. The enemy orcs love rebuilding stuff. They also love repairing stuff, but rebuilding, that's the bigger problem. But okay, with a couple of proxy Ziggurats, I managed to take out their town hall and everything else. So now I have an expansion. And those 2 gold mines that I have now are gonna be worth their weight in gold. Because next, I'm gonna talk about the orange base. This base is objectively the strongest one that I have to deal with. It has insanely powerful unique warlock units, and they often have 2 demolishers in their attack waves. So if they attack me, I have to use a group of acolytes to take out the demolishers, who alongside the attack wave are gonna take a lot of my structures down. However, I have found a little... I don't even know what to call this. Maybe it's a glitch, maybe it's a feature, but I have found it. So, get this. If you place a necropolis outside of the enemy base, they will of course kill it, but after they kill it, for whatever reason, they will return back home. So the whole attack wave will just skip this attack phase. So I guess they think of this necropolis as a forward base, and they kill it and they are satisfied with a job well done. And this is how I'm gonna deal with orange from now on. Losing the 255 gold that the necropolis costs is gonna be so much better than using gold to repair and rebuild the towers they've killed. So yeah. Next up is the brown base, which was surprisingly difficult to kill considering how easy they usually are. You know, when you play with regular units. This base features Ogre Magi's, and of course their favorite ability, Bloodlust, which increases the enemy unit's attack speed. When you fight their base head on, these guys are so strong. Like, the bloodlust makes them so strong, I need like 5 rows of tower to take care of all of them. But in another Reforged TM moment, the enemy, for whatever reason, decided not to build anything for a couple of minutes. They sent out their attack wave, but they never reinforced their defenders in the base. So for a couple of minutes, I had a unique opportunity to build a bunch of towers and take out these few defenders that are in the base. And I managed to do it. After killing the demolisher, I was able to do some proxy Ziggurats. I mined out my previous 2 gold mines, and this was the only thing I had. Next up was the light blue base. Their unique twists are Sappers. Little goblins that do a lot of damage to units and a whole lot of damage to buildings. But in order to do that damage, they have to Sudoku themselves. You know, they die in a blaze of glory, I guess. Now, the enemy entrance here had 2 towers. And instead of sending a bunch of acolytes to take them down, I sent a couple of acolytes to lure some sappers, and the sappers exploded and took the towers down. And that gave me more space to place a bunch of towers next to the enemy entrance. In the meantime, something started happening on the orange attack wave front. For whatever reason, they stopped being interested in 1 necropolis and now they want 2 of them. Once they take out 2, they're okay and they can return back. For the blue base, I had something very special planned. I used the enemy sappers to blow the enemy buildings up. If it works with the towers who have 500 health, I'm sure it's gonna work with the buildings who have 1500, right? Well, turns out, yes. So it does take a couple of them, but if you provoke the sappers with acolytes, they will start wanting to kill those acolytes. So you just place the acolytes to attack the building and they will blow up next to them. And sometimes they will even blow up even if there is no one there. Like, if my last acolyte is killed, sometimes the sapper will still blow up, because I guess the kill order has already been given and there's no abort button on the AI, so that helped me a couple of times as well. I used the sappers to blow up the first barracks and the bestiary without any problems. Then there was this last enemy barracks, and I had to take it out with proxy towers because I can't move into the range of the enemy demolisher because there are 2 towers right behind him. But okay, I did it. I barely did it, but I did it. And now it was time for the last hurdle, the red base. Its unique twists are dragons. 2200 health, chaos damage dealing, area of effect damage dealing, dragons. These guys are no joke. I placed a bunch of towers on the cliff leading to the enemy base, and those towers did actually good work. The problem here is that after blue is dead, the red base starts producing attack waves, so they will usually have around 5 dragons in their base. 5 flippin' dragons. And there is no way in hell I can kill those. The only saving grace that I have is that the enemy doesn't rebuild their dragon building. So if I manage to kill it, I will win. That is a big if. On a couple of occasions, I managed to bring a bunch of workers next to it, but it wasn't nearly enough. Honestly, at this point, I was so exhausted. I was like 6 hours into this level. I was this close to succumbing and saying, no, this is impossible with acolytes. I have to bring some ghouls in as well. But then I had a final desperate idea before I called in the ghoul squad. The red base AI activates when you kill the orange or the blue base. Kill meaning destroying all production structures. But what if I don't do that? What if I, for example, kill the enemy barracks, but leave their town hall alive? That means the enemy will never make additional units. They will just respawn their defenders, and that's it. So my last desperate attempt involved destroying everything but the blue base town hall. I left 2 towers around it to kill all respawning workers, because my god, they respawn them all the time. And I also left a couple of acolytes to snipe enemy buildings from being built. You know, in theory, this sounds like a good plan. Have a couple of units, have a couple of Ziggurats, I'm sure it's gonna be fine. The problem here is that the enemy town hall must not die, which often meant I had to focus down the town hall with the Ziggurats so the enemy peons can respawn and out-repair me. Oh, and here is a good time to talk about an additional problem about this level. You see, I'm playing against orcs, and orcs have a super fun and cool and quirky ability called building spikes, which means orc building deal melee damage to any melee attacker that attacks them. Yes, you've heard me correctly, ladies and gentlemen. Every acolyte trying to destroy a building will commit self-harm trying to kill the building. An acolyte deals about 10 damage, and the blue base spikes deal 20 damage per attack. So this was also one of the reasons why I never went for a melee kill on enemy production buildings. I had to do it with towers. I sometimes helped them with acolytes, but the towers are the things that needed to do the damage. Oh, and also fun fact, orc buildings that are being built also count as having spikes. So whenever the barracks was being built, any acolytes that are attacking it will self-harm themselves. But okay, it's all worth it now, because Red doesn't build any new units. They just respawn defenders. So again, I made a bunch of towers on the low ground, I baited the enemies many times, but I was able to kill them faster than they produced units. And at one point the enemy hero also fell, and that made things so much easier. So after sudokuing a couple of acolytes into the enemy towers, I was able to build buildings on top of the ramp. However, the main problem here is money. So in order to boost my economy, I had to do desperate measures. I sold all the towers that were inside my main base, and this barely gave me enough money to make 8 towers and upgrade them. And those towers were worth their weight in gold. Any dragon and any defender that came here saw a quick end. So as long as I had money and acolytes to repair the buildings, I was fine. But I still had to push further, so I made a couple more proxy Ziggurats in order to kill the first enemy barracks. And after taking down the barracks, I managed to surround the enemy dragon roost with a bunch of acolytes and finally take it down. One of them did manage to get out and kill a bunch of my towers, but I baited him to my tower line and he was down. The last dragon is dead. The enemy red base doesn't really have that many other defenders. However, there was a problem.
Our gold mine has collapsed.
I was out of money. So close to the end, I had no more cash. Neither for upgrading my frontline Ziggurats to towers, nor for making 2 necropolises under the orange base. So I had to make even more desperate monetary decisions. I sold all the necropolises in my main base and all the towers that were behind my frontline Ziggurats. I have 4 more towers and that is it. But after upgrading the towers with my final remaining funds, I managed to take down the enemy rebuilt barracks and the enemy's stronghold. But my desperation has reached a peak. I couldn't reach the last 2 enemy buildings, and of course I would sudoku myself if I tried to melee them. So I was forced to sell every single building on the map in order to make a haunted gold mine. I sold everything that I had, and I started mining from the enemy gold mine. The orange enemy destroyed my final 2 necropolises, so I had to hurry up and finish the level before they sent their last attack wave after me. And somehow, someway, barely, just barely enough, I managed to do it. And it only took 8 hours of my life, all the patience that I had, and after I ran out of those, all the swear words I had in my vocabulary, in order to win this level. This by far longest mission of Warcraft 3 that I have ever played. Honestly, I just want to go to sleep now. Just wake me up when it's time to do the mage mission.
You'll kill me with minions? At least fight me yourself!
The next mission is also known as the Mage mission, which is also known as the floor that insanely damages your units mission. Well, I have some news for you here. You know in the last mission how I gave it my everything, so I don't have to declare ghouls as workers? Well, my everything on this level is quite limited. The level gives you a gold mine with 50,000 gold, and that's it. And that is literally nothing. You might think that's enough for 200 workers, however 200 workers aren't nearly enough to beat this level. There are no additional gold mines, and even if I sell all my initial buildings, I'm still gonna be screwed. And top that off with the fact that I can't build any buildings in the city because the tiles are unbuildable. Well, I sent in 30 acolytes and I couldn't even get past the first couple of towers. That's how much damage the floor does. So yeah, I don't have any choice here but to declare ghouls workers. But even when I can build ghouls, this is gonna be insane. You're supposed to use abominations here who have a bunch of health to survive those floor tiles. and not measly little ghouls who have 100 health more than an acolyte. But okay, at least I have a decent unit that I can upgrade now. But still, this is gonna be a nightmare. I destroyed the first couple of towers with my ghouls, and then I went in and found a mage who is projecting the floor. I baited a couple of units around him to start following me, and I took them out one by one, and then I took out the mage himself. So far, so good. Throughout all this level, I made sure I micro my ghouls as carefully as possible. Because again, gold here is very low. And I can't use my heroes to collect gold coins that are scattered around the level. So yeah, the 15,000 gold that I get in the beginning, that was it. The second mage was a bit more difficult because he has more health and more guards, and he managed to kill a bunch of my ghouls when I tried to kill him. But eventually I took him down. Oh, and by the way, throughout the level, you get attacked by a bunch of strong units, and in order to mitigate my losses, I have to bait them to my base and then attack them with my towers. So yeah, that was also a fun experience to have to do, literally every 3 minutes. But okay, then I made even more ghouls, and I went to the last wizard expecting some kind of huge boss fight. But turns out he was even easier than the second one. He had more health, but he had a lot less defenders, and the dangerous floor here isn't really that deep, so I didn't take too much damage with my ghouls here. But next to the last room, I found the proper final boss. And it's none other than Antonidas himself. And he teleported my heroes next to him, expecting a huge boss fight, but these two weren't really in the mood for fighting. So I tasked my ghouls to the last boss chamber. First I had to deal with a couple of mages, who were pretty easy. But after that, Antonidas shows up with a bunch of elementals. Very strong elementals. In fact, they were so strong that I couldn't even afford to touch them, but I tasked all my ghouls to attack Antonidas. And my 100 supply worth of ghouls weren't even enough to kill him. He was still left with a couple of health. I did have a little bit of cash left, so I made like 10 more ghouls with them, and that was it. This was all the cash and all the ghouls that I have. And then I tasked those 10 to attack Antonidas, and I managed to do it. So yeah, no way I could have done this with acolytes, I barely managed to do this with ghouls. And yeah, in the end, Antonidas, who expected a huge boss fight, got killed by a bunch of minions.
You kill me with minions?
I feel like we're forgetting something.
And here we are. One more level to go. And you know, in theory, you could say that this one is gonna be pretty easy. This is a defense mission and I can build towers, so on paper I can just build a bunch of towers and that's it. However, there's a slight problem here. The enemy attack waves are disgustingly strong. It's almost as if you're supposed to be using units together with those towers to defend. But I guess towers are gonna have to suffice. In the beginning of the level, I quickly expanded to the gold mine in the southwest, and now I have 2 gold mines of income. Now, since I can only use towers for defense, I have to make sure I place them perfectly. Which means there's gonna be some building shenanigans going around. On the right side, I made a line of towers, and I covered them with a couple of sacrificial pits. Why them? Because this building only costs 75 gold, which makes it the cheapest gold building I can have. And since this building is only gonna be used to soak up some shots and mess with the enemy's pathing, the 75 gold I spent for it are gonna be more than worth it in the end. For the north entrance, I made a bunch of towers clamped up together. This side gets attacked with the strongest waves, so it needs the most towers. And of course, I also covered it with a bunch of sacrificial pits again. On the left side is my main base, and I had to make sure enemy units never bust inside. So here I also made a bunch of towers clamped up together, and I surrounded them with sacrificial pits and necropolises, which are going to be used to make acolytes. Now, the enemy here has 3 bases, and each one has a theme. I'm getting a deja vu feeling here, but that might just be me. On the left, there is a gnome base that sends 2 kinds of waves. A very easy to deal with anti-air wave, which consists of riflemen and anti-airplanes. The more dangerous wave that they sent is an anti-building wave, which has siege engines, and those are able to destroy a huge number of buildings throughout their lives. So I had to make sure they are being focused, and they are being focused very well. A couple of times I even put acolytes in their way so they couldn't reach any of my towers. Gotta make do with what I have, I guess. The second base is the blue base. This one either sends griffins or griffins accompanied by knights. And griffins are insanely strong against, well, anything, especially if they're in a group. And they are always in a group. So whenever there are griffins attacking, I had to select my towers and manually tell them to attack the griffins. Because otherwise they will evenly split their damage and they will take more damage because more griffins are gonna be alive at the end. So yeah, turns out my mass-based defense strategy had a lot more microing going on than base defense strategies usually do. But alright. And last but not least, there is a pink base. And this base loves sending, well, everything. They send knights, riflemen, sorceresses, priests, even heroes. But thankfully my cleverly positioned sacrificial pits are doing their job really well here. And the enemy AI here gets totally bamboozled trying to attack me. The problem here is that they also love sending mortar teams. And unfortunately these don't get stuck on buildings. So I have to have a dedicated attack wave of acolytes to stop them. And yeah, this is the tactic that I have been using for 25 of the 30 minutes that this mission lasts. As you might suspect, the problem are not those 25 minutes, it's the 5 minutes at the end. The pressure on every side here starts getting stronger and stronger. And there isn't much I can do about it other than trying to out-repair the damage my structures are taking. But I do manage to survive somehow until the last minute mark. And this is where things start getting really rough. All three bases start attacking with everything they have. And when I say everything, I mean everything. They even attack with workers. Now the left side doesn't really get that much pressure. They attack with a bunch of anti-building stuff, however there are a lot of buildings to go through, so this side will never reach me in the middle. The problem are the north and east sides. The north gets attacked by a bunch of griffins, so I again had to manually target them to minimize their damage. Thankfully there are a lot of buildings in the middle, so they're gonna be taking their time as well. The east side, however, that's a different story. In addition to a bunch of knights and other units, this side is being attacked by a bunch of heroes. And those heroes love using AoE spells on my buildings. So most of them fell very quickly. But I managed to somehow survive to the 20-second mark with a bunch of acolytes surrounding Kel'Thu Who. I even got the 5 acolytes who were mining the gold to help. And I surrounded Kel'Thu Who with a bunch of acolytes and I hoped for the best. Obviously this part was balanced around the fact that you have Arthas who can heal him and a bunch of Hellhounds and Infernals to surround him. Unfortunately those were all killed after they spawned, so I had nothing but these couple of acolytes. I was doing pretty well though, and for a tiny second it seemed like I'm gonna do this. However, at the 2-second mark, I lost. And I was so close. So I reloaded to a save before the last minute, in hopes of finding myself in a better position later. But somehow I wasn't able to replicate that. I'm sure this has happened to you as well. You play a really difficult segment for the first time, and you manage to get really far. And then you reload, and you couldn't even get close to that part. And then you spend the next hour trying to beat that first attempt. This has happened to you as well, right? I'm not crazy about this, right? Like, please tell me in the comment section when that happened to you and which game it was. I'm sure you can find an example for that. This has nothing to do with Warcraft 3, but if you've ever played the new God of War Ragnarok, there's this secret Valkyrie boss, and in my first attempt I got her to like 5 hits away from death. And then in the next hour, maybe even 2 of playtime, I couldn't even get close to that one. But okay, I digress. I reloaded to my previous best attempt. But this time, instead of surrounding Kel'Thu Who with acolytes, I sent 2 acolytes to the north to distract a couple of griffins that attack him, while the rest of them go east to distract the pink player. And this worked surprisingly well. I managed to do it with 1 second remaining. So after repeating this a couple of times, I managed to get from 1 second remaining to victory. This was a very dirty victory, but it was a victory. A victory for the workers. And that was it. Like, this was so close that they managed to kill the Lich after the timer expired, but before the last cutscene triggered, which, in a classic Reforged moment, resulted in this immortal cutscene, where a dead Kel'Thu Who managed to summon Archimond. Seriously, this is how the cutscene is supposed to look like. So yeah, that's how close it was. And yes, that was it. The whole campaign done with acolytes only. There was this one mission that forced me to go ghouls, but all other missions that had me build units were beaten with acolytes. And let me tell you one thing before I end this. This has been the longest challenge run that I have ever done. I've spent 25 hours trying to beat these 8 missions with workers only. And I am exhausted. Thankfully, next up is the Ore campaign, which I will do only with peons. Thank God, these guys don't need blight to make buildings, so this campaign should be a lot easier. Oh, and I'm gonna regret saying those words, aren't I? But that's a problem for next time. Thank you for watching, thank you for sticking with me, smash that like button, subscribe if you want to see more of my videos, and I guess I'll see you in the next challenge.